If you've been on social media this week and you are interested in the EA College Football 25 game that is set to come out in less than a month now, which is really fun to say, then you know that they released a list of the top 10, and later they released the top 25 toughest environments, or toughest, I forget how they worded it.
Toughest places to play.
Toughest places to play in college football. So they released a top 10, and we also made top 10s for ourselves.
Yeah, so
let's compare and contrast those.
Yeah, let's start with EA's top 10. I'll just read them out right quick. It is Kyle Field at number 1, home of the Texas A&M Aggies. Bryant-Denny Stadium at 2, home of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Tiger Stadium, LSU at 3, Ohio State at 4, Georgia at 5, Penn State 6, Camp Randall, Wisconsin at 7, Oklahoma at 8 with an interesting stadium name, Florida State at number 9 and Doak Campbell, and then the Florida Gators at number 10. Now, let's start at 10 and count our way down on our list. So who do you have in your number 10 spot?
Okay, so if we're counting down from 10, the first two names you're going to hear, if you're just a college football fan, you might be like, man, why are those not in the top 5? They win at home a lot. Well, these first two fan bases and environments, I'll say, that I'm going to mention that are going to fall at number 10 and number 9 for me, fall into the category that I like to call we expect to be here.
Yeah.
And the first one that falls into that category for me is Alabama. Alabama's football games, they have a nice environment because it's like a business meeting. You show up, you get your business done. You are happy when it gets done, and you're not so happy when it doesn't get done. But the reason Alabama has been such a tough place to play, and probably the reason it's elevated a little more on the other list, I think, is just because of how good the team has been.
Yeah. It's not that the crowd.
I think you have to consider that a little bit when you are talking about toughest places to play. I think Alabama's kind of one of those places where it's just like golf clap when we score a touchdown.
Well, you look at the Texas game last year. That's why all offseason I was like, Texas is winning in Alabama. It's not this overwhelming home environment. It's that the team is so good. It makes everything around it seem better. And you saw Texas go in there and beat them, straight up beat them. So I definitely agree with that. And then what was your other team in this class here?
And then at number 9, I have Georgia. I think Georgia's fallen into this category as well. I don't think in the Mark Richt era, I don't think Sanford Stadium was really that hard of a place to play. They had letdowns year after year in the SEC. The one at the forefront of my mind is Tennessee's Hail Mary at Georgia to win the game. If it's a raucous atmosphere, I'm sorry, that just does not happen. A Hail Mary is not going to win the game in a raucous environment. And it did, I believe that was 2016 at Sanford Stadium. Obviously, it's gotten a lot tougher to play at Sanford Stadium since the hire of Kirby Smart. They've been on this incredible run. But I think it's kind of one of those fan bases and one of those environments where everyone just expects to win. And so they kind of check out by the second quarter. And so it's one of those things where, it might be pretty tough the first drive, but I don't think you can only consider the first drive. I think you got to consider the noise level of the fans throughout the games. I think you got to consider how the fans are in night games versus in day games, and if there's a huge drop-off there, which I think there is for Georgia, both Georgia and Alabama. And just my last thought on Georgia, like, the only reason I put them above Alabama is because they have fans that will just bark at you.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit intimidating if you're an opposing fan visiting Sanford Stadium. It's probably intimidating as a player to get barked at by the fans down by the sideline. So 10 and 9 for me are Alabama and Georgia.
Yeah, I could definitely I'm not too far off on that Alabama thing. We'll see how I feel about the other in a minute. But I have Texas at number 10. I think Texas is such a difficult place to play. And I know there will be people saying, well, Texas lost at home a lot. They were terrible. They were bad for so long. Well, look at I know this is a big aspect of a home environment is elevating a team. But if you watch a Tom Herman coach Texas team, he had no idea what he was doing. And I think if you have a coach that cannot adjust within game, no matter what your crowd is, another team is going to exploit you for that. So as soon as Texas got even remotely good again, you saw not a lot of people started winning in DKR. They really took it to Alabama a couple years ago. Should have won that game, in my opinion, and then looked better and better every year. I think DKR is a very tough place to play, but there were a couple teams I was teetering on for that 10th spot. Then everyone up here is people I thought guaranteed dead on should be on this list. Number 9 is the Oregon Ducks, and Autzen Stadium is rowdy out there. It is a very tough place to play. There's a reason not many teams win in Autzen other than the Washington Huskies. And then you look at a big game for me last year was, I know Colorado last year was not a good team, but still, the beat down they put on Colorado.
Never had a chance.
No, and the crowd was into that entire game. This is not a crowd that they went up by 40 and the crowd started to leave. They started to go home. No, they were still at Colorado's throats the entirety of that game. And you see that for every team. This crowd in Autzen is the best West Coast crowd by far. I'm sorry, Washington fans. It is.
Yeah, it's not even close. Oregon comes in at number 8 for me. I pretty much would echo everything you just said there. They're also 19-1 in their last 20 home games with that loss. That home loss to Washington. I believe that was this past season, was it not? It was. And really tough place to play. Dan Lanning has that place trending in the right direction, and it just came back to my mind. That's an interesting thing to note when you have Ohio State coming into town.
Ohio State's losing that game
this season. So
Oregon is winning that game.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. I think Oregon's going to take that one. I believe. Yeah. Anyway, Oregon number 8 for me. Do you want me to go down to number 7?
Yeah, sure.
Number 7 for me is Penn State. A lot of people might have them a little bit higher. I kind of have them in this middle spot. I think they're an extremely overrated home atmosphere, but I don't think it's quite enough to drop them out of this list entirely.
Man, who would drop them out of this list entirely?
The reason I don't drop them out of the list entirely is because despite their struggles against Michigan, against Ohio State at home, they just can't seem to win.
Everyone ranked ever.
Well, I don't know. I don't know about that. Penn State takes care of business against everyone at home, pretty much everyone at home other than Ohio State and Michigan. And the only reason I don't take them out of the list for that is a lot of these games against Ohio State and Michigan at home that they've played that have been somewhat close, I think have only been close because of how awesome the atmosphere is. And so that's why I have them remaining in the list at 7.
All right. My number 8 is Jordan-Hare Stadium and the Auburn Tigers. And this is a real weird one because on the one hand, you lose to New Mexico State at home. And some people would say you cannot ever be on this list if you lose to New Mexico State at home as an SEC football team. On the other hand, you ask any SEC team, what is one place you do not want to go at night ever? I would rather stay home and not play the game. Jordan-Hare Stadium. It is one. I think if you ask someone where they want to go on a night game SEC, what are 3 places you never want to see on the schedule? They are LSU, Florida, and Auburn. I think those are the scariest places to travel late in the season or for a big game or for a night game. You do not want any part of Jordan-Hare voodoo. There's a reason that's a thing. It's Alabama every time Alabama comes to town.
That's my only pushback.
There's Georgia every time Georgia comes to town.
I think it's just those two, though.
See, but it can't not be on the list though if it elevates a team that much.
Yeah,
you look at
I'm not mad at that.
An Auburn team who I think if last year's Auburn team travels to Georgia, they lose by 30. If they travel to Alabama, they lose by 30. Instead, they were 1 play away from beating Alabama, and if they remembered how to cover Brock Bowers, they beat Georgia as well, and that was just like 2 drives. So when you have a team that has, in my opinion, had no right to make a bowl game even last season just based on the talent level, and they are so close to beating 2 of the top 5 teams in the country, and you see that every time they come to town, I think it deserves a spot on the list, so I have them at 8. Then
I'm not too mad at that.
Okay. Then at number 7, I have the Clemson Tigers, and this is a difficult one for me because they are so unbeatable at home, and I think if the list was who is least likely to lose a home game, Clemson is higher than this. The issue for me, though, is just for a lot of that stretch, they were so good, teams like Florida State fell off a cliff. And so there's not as many difficult teams coming to town as there are for teams I have above this.
That cannot be your argument.
This is, if you
cannot be serious.
I know you're not going to like that, but
2015, Notre Dame comes into town.
It's
as
Notre
the
Dame,
number
it's
3 ranked team.
Notre Dame and Louisville are the 2 big.
Number 3, 2016, Louisville comes into town with the Heisman winner in Lamar Jackson. They come into town. They lose to the Clemson Tigers. Both of those games, Clemson was not favored to win the game, and they were the the lower ranked team.
That's why you're
2018.
That's why you're this high on the list.
2018, number 10, Texas A&M comes in because of the atmosphere, never has a chance.
That team wasn't that good.
They scored 10 points. They didn't go anywhere else and only score 10 points. Later on that season, Clemson has it's not just that. Okay, well I'll save my Clemson thoughts for later.
That's the reason
Clemson's a lot higher on my list.
I think that it is a tough place to play. It's an incredible environment, but for me, you look at the teams above them on this list, I can't say that it's more difficult to win a game at Clemson for just any team than those other places, in my opinion.
No chance.
Okay, well, we'll see. Let's do from here. Let's just go 1-1. So who's your number 6?
Oh, go. I think we should go from number 1 down to number 6.
All right,
now.
so let's go back up to 1. And for me, the number 1 is Baton Rouge. It is Death Valley. It is LSU. That is just, it's the most difficult place to play in college football. I think most people would tell you that. They've registered multiple earthquakes down there in Death Valley. It's the most terrifying place to play every year. I want no part of LSU and Death Valley ever, especially at night. It gets even more terrifying. You never want to see that on your schedule. I think it is the toughest place to play in college football.
And that's a consensus pick there from me as well. I have LSU in my top spot. A little bit of a history lesson. Clemson's Memorial Stadium was nicknamed Death Valley first. Obviously have the Rock from Death Valley, Howard's Rock. Cool tradition there. The reason LSU calls their stadium Death Valley is because they came into town against Clemson and beat Clemson, I believe, in the 50s, maybe the 60s. Either way, it was a Frank Howard Clemson team. Beat them. They were already pretty much known for having a raucous environment. At first, they called themselves Deaf Valley, DEAF. That is harder to say than Death Valley. I think they got a little bit lazy, and I think they should have kept their Death Valley name and not just ripped off Clemson's Death Valley. I know I can't really talk about ripoffs because Clemson as a university is kind of just a ripoff of Auburn, but added a lake and took the mascot as well. But definitely
without the cool part of the mascot.
LSU is definitely the toughest place to play.
Yeah, we agree on that. And then at number 2, I have Michigan. It's another place that you just don't want to see on the schedule. And you saw as soon as Michigan got even remotely nationally relevant, no one won in Michigan.
No. And you have 110,000 people right on top of you
massive.
In that bowl shape. It's not even the upper deck and the lower deck system. They're all just right on top of you.
And I tell you what, if you've never seen it, go watch a video of the crowd singing Mr. Brightside at Michigan and tell me that is not a top 2 environment in college football.
That no doubt. Michigan's also my number 2.
Yeah, then number 3, this is where we start to disagree, and I have Georgia at number 3, which I think might surprise you a little bit, but I would say 4 seasons ago, you asked me how much difference the Georgia home crowd makes. I have them about where you do at 9, but in recent years, when Arkansas was good and came in there and got nothing going whatsoever, when Tennessee came in as the number 1 ranked team in college football and did almost nothing versus that Georgia team
that won the national championship.
Still, though, it makes a difference because that was a very good Tennessee team, and there's a difference between 2 teams.
I just don't understand how you can
caliber
how
teams.
Can you elevate Georgia for that, but you push down Clemson. You say the only reason is because the teams were so good throughout that period.
Because I just feel like this Georgia crowd doesn't get as many, like, they haven't played a night game in like 4 years, so I feel like it's hard to judge them on the quality of, because they're not. And the one time they did, I know it was not an amazing Notre Dame team, but they curb stomped that team. And the Ole Miss this past year, it was a good Ole Miss team, murdered them when Missouri came to town.
Also won the national championship last year.
I know, but these teams are so, they're not even leaving a doubt in these games other than the Missouri game. And I think Missouri was a top 6 team in football last year. You just look.
Maybe that's where we differ a little bit. So when I'm thinking of tough places to play, I'm thinking like close game, who's going to push you over the top? And I think Georgia fans in these close games, they get anxious and they are not loud. And I think they get anxious, and I agree with you. It is a very hard place to play when Georgia is spanking the other team. But I think when you get Georgia into a close game, which we have not seen them in a close game at
Missouri.
home since, other than Missouri. And I don't think the crowd was as much of a factor.
You watched the miscues of that Missouri offense in the fourth
Georgia
quarter.
had the best defense in the country.
Missouri had a top 5 offense in the country.
Like, the crowd's good. It's not number 3 good. It's just not. It's not. It's not better than Clemson's. Clemson's my number 3 team. Clemson, there have been several games throughout the last decade that Clemson was dead in the water and should have lost. But what did the crowd do? The crowd stayed with it. The crowd was the 12th man. We'll rip that off. We're the school of rip-offs. We'll rip off Texas A&M's 12th man for all I care. Clemson's Death Valley Memorial Stadium is a top 3 tough place to play in the country. You think of 2016, NC State had a 27-yard field goal to win the game. He missed it because you've got the hill, you've got all the students losing their minds, and he pushes it to the right. Clemson wins that game because of the crowd. You fast forward 2018. Trevor Lawrence, a freshman, gets knocked out of the game with a concussion. Kelly Bryant had just quit on the team. He said, "I'm not the starter anymore. I'm just going to quit. I'm going to redshirt this year. I'm not going to be there for my team." Literally the next week, our freshman quarterback goes down. Chase Bryce inherits a 21-7 deficit against Syracuse. The crowd gets behind Clemson, force a couple turnovers, a few false starts. Chase Bryce legacy drive to win the game. The crowd at Clemson pushes them over the top. We go back to 2015. We already mentioned that Notre Dame game. I was at that game. The best environment in college football I've ever been to. Granted, I've only been to Clemson and South Carolina for non-neutral site games. I will say that. But Notre Dame was the better team in that game. Notre Dame had this big come from behind to kind of try to steal the game at the end. 2-point conversion. That place is incredibly loud. There's a hurricane going on. It's raining so hard my poncho was soaked through. And what do you know? Clemson gets it done with a 2-point conversion stop. Once again, fast forward back to 2016. Lamar Jackson pushing down the field to win the game. They had Clemson pretty much dead in the water, and the crowd lost its mind so much on that 4th and 11 play that the Louisville wide receiver literally forgot how far he was supposed to get the first down, and he was run out of bounds 1 yard short. And those are only the ones that come to the forefront of my mind. And so that's why Clemson's number 3 for me, because it's not always just these absolute blowouts and the crowd just gets on them at the beginning. It's these games where it comes down to 1, 2, 3, 4 plays, and that Clemson crowd just pushes them over the top. And you'll hear Dabo Swinney in his pressers. If you look up any of these games' post-game pressers, the first thing, thank you so much to the fans. We would not have won this game without the Clemson Tiger faithful in this game.
Yeah, I think that's where you and I differ, because I think if you look at my 5 to 8 range on my list, those are the teams in that category that you're talking about, where if it's a close game, the fans will kind of lift you over the top. Whereas my top 4, I feel like are places, because to me, it's more than just can the crowd lift you up in a close game. It's these crowds, I feel like my 1 through 4, LSU, Michigan, Georgia, and then the next game I'm going to get to. If you're a team that is similarly skilled as them and you go in there and you go down early, you have no hope ever. The crowd will decimate you instantly.
I could say the same thing about Clemson.
I feel like
my thing about Clemson is Clemson has that piece, and they have the piece where they'll push you over the top in the big game. Because there's other than this year, Florida State, which we lose in overtime, and that wasn't on the crowd at all. Cade Klubnik just got strip sacked. We should not have been in that game. That was the only time that a team came from behind at Clemson in the last decade.
Yeah, I just think we're going to agree to disagree.
And the 3 losses since the last game came out, by 1 point to Pitt in 2016, by 1 point to South Carolina in 2022, and by 7 in overtime, with a missed 29-yard kick to win the game for Clemson.
Okay, how different from that is Alabama's home record?
I already talked about why Alabama's so low.
Okay,
their crowd just claps like they're at church.
The home record,
after a song is sung.
It can't only be the home record though,
But the margins of loss. 9 total points. 3 losses by a total of 9 points. Some of these other teams, LSU, they're the toughest place to play. They've gotten blown out of the water at home a couple times. Michigan, before the Jim Harbaugh era, blown out of the water a few times. Florida, blown out of the water more times than can be counted. Ohio State has lost to Michigan twice in a row at home. Tennessee, we know they have 19 losses in the last decade at home.
It's when I look at these other teams, it's more where do I feel like I could just send a random team and they would have a chance of winning the game? Like if it's just.
So are we? I don't know. We're just gonna have to agree to disagree.
I think we're viewing this differently, and
we're just gonna have to agree to disagree. This is good discourse.
Yes. And anyway, at number 4, I have Ohio State. I think that the Ohio State crowd it's one of the best in college football. Easily, the shoe is raucous out there. It's a very hard place to play unless you're Oregon. But the years that they owned Michigan, you think of the JT Barrett year when he was maybe kind of short of that first down. That's a game that I know this is what you mentioned earlier. That's a game that Ohio State does not win without that crowd there. These big games, Ohio State's crowd, as I mentioned, they can just deliver that knockout blow. You're an away team, you have one bad drive, the crowd will not let you hear the end of it for the rest of the game. So I think they are just on another level. And then this was a surprise to me is who you have at 4 and who I have at 5. I did not think you would rank this team higher than me.
Yeah, I'll just round out my 4, 5, and 6. I have Florida. The Swamp is just absolutely unbelievable, especially at night. I think this is one of those where there's not, I wouldn't say there's a giant gap per se between night game and day game, but I think if I'm making a night game only list, I'm putting Florida at 2, only behind LSU.
Yeah, I would do that as well.
I think the Swamp is that good at night. I think Florida's the only reason Florida doesn't crack the top 3 for me.
Because the team was bad and they lost a lot.
How the team is the fact that the team has been bad. But they're still good enough. The crowd is still good enough for me. Like I would not want to go into Florida and play a good Florida team. Like I'd want to go there right now because they're down a little bit, but I don't think that's the crowd's fault at all. I think Florida's going to find themselves.
You look at the Utah game a couple years ago. They had no business even being close to Utah that year with how bad that team was. Week 1, night game, crowd into it, dead Utah.
Florida's going to find themselves this season in a game against a team that they should not beat.
I tell you what, they intentionally gave us no night games at the end of the year, and that is why. Our brutal stretch, our 5-game stretch at the end of the year, the Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, LSU and Ole Miss, both of them, neither one of them are night games. I know the LSU says TBD on time. It is not a night game. They did not give us night games on either one of those teams because they don't want to see a Florida team ruin an Ole Miss or an LSU season late in the year because of that. But I tell you what, all you UCF fans that are saying UCF is better than Florida right now, you got a night game in Gainesville. You are going to be decimated.
Yes.
UCF has no chance.
Yes.
Anyway, I have Florida at 5.
Yeah, Florida at 4 for me, Ohio State at 5 for pretty much all the reasons that Mike already mentioned.
And we both have Tennessee at 6.
Tennessee at 6. I think that's pretty much a sweet spot for Tennessee.
Yeah, their home crowd is so good. And they're another team kind of like Florida where just the team has not been good, but the home crowd will carry them anyway. And I tell you what, their Halloween night game might be one of my favorite entrances I've ever seen.
With the black uniforms,
black
too.
jersey, like spooky Rocky Top.
Yeah.
That was a very, very good entrance. But I think we can both agree that our lists are miles better than the trash that EA cooked up with Kyle Field and Texas A&M at number 1 somehow.
So that might have been a little hard to keep track of. So if you just want to hear my 1 through 10,
it'll be on the screen.
Okay, it'll be on the screen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
1 through 10 for both of us will be on the screen, and the graphics department will make sure that the teams are kept up with throughout that segment there for you guys.
Sweet.
Then I had a couple honorable mentions. I had Alabama out of my list entirely for the reasons you said. It's a lot of golf clapping down there. Washington just missed. They were probably my number 11. They're a very good environment, not quite into that tier that those top 9 are for me. Then Penn State. Oh my goodness, is Penn State overrated? They don't have any meaningful home wins since the game where they blocked the kick versus Ohio State. And if you're a team, I don't care, because we talked about all these teams. We just had such a long discussion about the crowd should be able to take the team over the top in these games. The crowd should be able to take the team over the top. Take the team over the top one time versus Ohio State or Michigan since, 2017?
Yeah.
So it's outside of the top 10 for me. Fight me, I don't care. Then I had UCF just outside. The Bounce House is insane. I think with UCF in the Big 12, the world is going to learn a lot more just how insane the Bounce House can get. It is a great stadium down there at Central Florida. And then just not even an honorable mention, but in here because they were in the EA list is Florida State. You lost to Jacksonville State at home. No.
Yeah, like what are we doing?
No, not a top 10 hardest place to play. But anyways, after all that rambling, that is the college football talk for this week.